How do you start a review about the beloved Dark Knight Trilogy? Do I open with its director, Christopher Nolan, the guy who made Inception, Interstellar, and geek out about how his vision of Batman grew with his talent as a film creator?
Breathe in your fears. Face them.
Or do I open with a moment of silence for Heath Ledger, who elevated the definition of performance with his physical embodiment of the madman, the Joker? Or do I start by saying that I'm not a fan of comic book movies, and that the only reason I watched Endgame was because it was playing on our cruise ship, and that Nolan's Batman proves that superhero films don't need to follow MCU's and definitely not DC's branding of its subgenre? I have no idea how to start this video, so I'll just tell the truth. My girlfriend Caitlin never watched any of the Dark Knight movies.
What, do you live under a rock?
So after picking up the Blu-ray set that just about everybody owns, we watched them. Watching her enjoy The Dark Knight, and myself becoming once again emotionally invested in Bruce Wayne's birth and fall as Batman, proves to me that the Dark Knight Trilogy is the comic book equivalent of Lord of the Rings. It cannot be outdone.
Oh, you think darkness is your ally? You merely adopted the dark. I was born in it.
Never again will someone so earnestly and so meticulously craft Batman as Nolan and Christian Bale have so successfully done. Now, while I can geek out over how much I enjoy these movies and how important they are to the doomed genre Scorsese dubs amusement park films, I have to admit that they are not perfect. I'm looking at you, Dark Knight Rises. But that's only in comparison to the second film, The Dark Knight, which is the pinnacle of Nolan's vision. And I cannot wait to discuss it. This isn't an analysis, because these films are mostly straightforward, with the exception of, again, 3. And I don't know enough about the comic books to talk about Nolan's adaptation thoroughly. So this video is purely honest appreciation. I'm going to talk about what I love about these films, and what I didn't like so much. And if I really need a reason to talk about The Dark Knight, let's say that it's because Nolan's anticipated film Tenet is releasing soon, and I want to discuss the films that made him who he is. So, without further ado, Batman begins. At last, a Batman film that takes itself seriously, and its realism is persuasive. If there ever was a version of our world in which Batman existed, it's Nolan's. The first half of the film spends its time developing Bruce's fear of bats and his hatred towards evil, as well as developing the crime-infested Gotham, and of course, Bruce's relationship with Mastermind Lucius Fox. All of this is given weight and depth, thanks to Nolan's crafty script and cinematographer Wally Pfister's dark and moody Gotham. By the time Wayne actually becomes Batman, we've watched him invent this image, and it's completely believable. Time is something Nolan learned to use expertly in his debut theatrical release, Memento, a film about a man with severe memory loss who's hunting down his wife's murderer by following a trail of clues he's left for himself via tattoos on his own body. Now, the Dark Knight Trilogy doesn't take time as seriously as Memento does, but that's because it doesn't have to. Nolan's application of time in Batman Begins serves solely to immerse its audience in a believable, realistic world where Batman exists. And it works.
You're a good cop.
The second half of the film, in my opinion, just isn't as good as the first. Now that Batman is actually here, I was really just ready for Joker to show up and The Dark Knight to start.
There's a Batman.
But that's more my lack of patience than it is the second half's fault. I'll never forget when my grandmother Marion, whose YouTube channel is linked below if you want to check her out, she took me to see Batman Begins as a reward for pulling my loose tooth out. I was like 7. Scarecrow scared the shit out of me. And my nightmares were justified because Scarecrow's mask, and especially Batman's mask, are terrifying under the influence of Crow's hallucinogen. You know what's also scary? Young Bruce's haircut. Like, if you're not interested in Batman, watch these films to just witness the development of Bruce's hairstyles, cause this somehow becomes this. Yeah. Batman Begins is a great movie, with a score from the legendary composer Hans Zimmer, an awesome performance from Christian Bale, and Michael Caine, of course. But it's an even better start to an awesome trilogy. And having watched the trilogy back to back, the development of Nolan's vision from Begins to The Dark Knight is immense. Considering Begins was only Nolan's 3rd big budget film, I'm sure that success played into his confident next film, The Prestige, which is another great film that plays with time and also stars Christian Bale as well as Hugh Jackman. At this point, Nolan was on fire.
Oh my God!
4 critically and commercially successful films under his belt, but nothing would compare to his next release.
I'm just ahead of the curve.
You have all these rules and you think they'll save you.
The Dark Knight is not the Batman movie we deserved. It's the movie we needed. The film is a visual spectacle. Nolan and Pfister's vision of Gotham is created with gorgeous sweeping shots of the city, and the darkness we discovered in Begins is now dirtier, more visceral. Though while the film is visually and technically a wonder, it's the performances that make this film so legendary.
That's the point of Batman. He can be the outcast. He can make the choice that no one else can make. The right choice.
This is not a story of good versus evil. It's way more complicated than that. Political, even. The citizens of Gotham consider Batman a vigilante, blaming him for the death of cops and citizens. And the Joker, while evil, is more interested in playing with the emotions of his victims. His actions pose moral dilemmas for his enemies.
Make it fast.
It's in this psychological battleground that our actors elevate their characters to new standards. While the action, chase sequences, and large-scale explosions are all impressive, it's the drama we care more deeply
I'll
about.
show you. When the chips are down, these civilized people, they'll eat each other.
The relationship between Bruce and Rachel, Rachel and Dent, Dent and Batman, Batman and the Joker.
Where's the Italian?
There are many perspectives shared in this story, and all of them are believable and important. Heath Ledger's groundbreaking performance as the Joker is simply terrifying. How do you bring such a comical character to life in Nolan's realistic vision? Heath Ledger knew exactly how, and it was the role he had been waiting for.
Blow this out of proportion.
You think you could steal from us and just walk away?
Yeah.
I've always been a huge fan of his. I've read a lot about his life and his career. He was an immensely talented actor. I'd say he was the next Daniel Day-Lewis, not just because of his talent, but because of his attitude. Ledger hated being in the public eye. His popularity after 10 Things I Hate About You and A Knight's Tale became unbearable for him. He even refused the role of Spider-Man because he didn't want to be idolized. So when the opportunity to play an infamous character who represents the destruction of the society Ledger grew so much to hate, he was all in. All in. And he's unrecognizable.
It was one of those moments where I was asked if I would be interested in playing the Joker, and I knew 5 seconds later exactly how to play it.
Acting is a hard job, while surely overpaid, but Acting demands a lot from a performer, and the level of performance Ledger reached is sadly a product of bad habits. Understanding the emotional place Ledger was, the desperation he had as an actor to do something amazing, led to his death. This is the hardest part of the Dark Knight Trilogy to talk about for me because I'm so conflicted. On one hand, I love this performance, and this Joker is one that will always haunt me. But in the other hand, I can't idolize someone who died because of his commitment to a role. And maybe, though it makes me cry to think this, maybe Ledger purposefully went all in so that we couldn't idolize him, because he wouldn't want that.
The Joker, the character of the Joker was just too good to turn down.
The Dark Knight is the only movie in this trilogy where Batman is involved in the whole film. In Begins, we spend the first half witnessing Batman's invention, and in 3, well, we'll get there. Considering The Dark Knight is Batman's film, and not only that, it's Batman versus the Joker, it's easy to forget about another big part of this film, the birth of Two-Face.
No, you're not.
I've always slept on Aaron Eckhart's performance as Harvey Dent, but this time around, I really appreciated his performance, and more importantly, his character. Honestly, this movie is more about Dent than it is the Joker, and while considering their relationship, and after having watched 3 again, I realized that the Joker actually wins in Dark Knight. By no means is that a happy ending, and I think this realization is important to have before watching Dark Knight Rises. Sure, the Joker is put behind bars at the end of the film, but his manipulation of Harvey Dent and Dent's transition to Two-Face is proof that the Joker succeeded in destroying the one leader who legally could fight Gotham's crime. The scene where he makes Batman decide between Rachel and Dent is probably my favorite scene in the whole trilogy because it's just so fucked. The level of manipulation is unreal, and the loss of Rachel means everything. It's that scene where the Joker actually wins, and Batman, who takes the blame for Dent's actions as Two-Face, has to go into hiding, directly leading to the events of Dark Knight Rises.
Your spirit? Oh, your buddy!
Dark Knight Rises is the biggest, most expensive production of the trilogy. It has the most sets, the most explosions, the most tech, and surprisingly, the least amount of Batman.
Nothing out there for me.
But one thing it has is a screenplay written by Christopher and Jonathan Nolan, the same guys who wrote The Dark Knight. And while I'll be deep diving into the good and bad of this film, I want to start by praising its poetry.
You think all this can last? There's a storm coming, Mr. Wayne.
The Dark Knight had its fair share of memorable lines, but they took this to the next level with Bane, a jacked-up poet who speaks only in Shakespeare, and who has the best lines in the entire trilogy.
You don't fear death. You welcome it. Your punishment must be more severe.
The title of Dark Knight Rises is misleading. This is a movie about Batman being broken and being forced to face his decisions in The Dark Knight, which is an honest emotional response. This reminds me of a point I missed earlier, but The Dark Knight very rarely references its predecessor. It's expected of the audience to know Batman's origins, but this doesn't render Begins useless. I mean, we're not talking about Katie Holmes. Calm down, Nolan. And Dark Knight Rises uses the lore of Begins in ways most of us weren't expecting. And it mostly works. Considering how much this film borrows from 1 and 2, and considering the new characters it brings to the table, there is at times too much going on. While I appreciate the familiar faces, it often feels rushed, which is odd considering how I just praised Nolan for using time so eloquently. Though, while this is my biggest gripe with the film, there is also the other big bad motherfucker who makes up for it, because Bane is awesome. Starting off years after the events of Dark Knight, Bruce Wayne has become a shut-in, and Batman has disappeared. The first hour is a convoluted mess. Within this hour, Bane is introduced in a badass scene without any context. Bruce Wayne goes broke somehow. Catwoman steals Wayne's fingerprints and sells them. Why? We can only assume. Oh, and you totally forgot Joseph Gordon-Levitt was in this film. I mean, at least I did. Before I continue on, I want to pinpoint a small scene. One of the first places Bruce Wayne visits after re-emerging into society is a masked ball. To be honest, I don't remember exactly why. Like I said, this first hour is a mess. But I did like the scene because Bruce Wayne is the only one not wearing a mask. And I thought that metaphor was awesome. Remember, it's not long before Wayne's true identity will be revealed.
Mr. Wayne.
And also, considering how self-conscious Wayne must be about people linking him to Batman, since, both of them conveniently disappeared, I want to say this scene represents his mistrust in society. He feels like the bad guy, and he's surrounded by people he doesn't know. While the first hour is painful, its payoff is worth it once the dots start connecting and the realization occurs that Bruce Wayne is fucked.
Peace has cost you your strength. Victory has defeated you.
It was at this moment that he knew. He fucked up.
As soon as Bruce's identity is out, he is broken. Bane wrecks him in what is my favorite fight scene of the trilogy. The difference between a retired Batman and this monster Bane is insurmountable. And this leads directly to my next favorite part of the film, the prison sequence. While Bane is wreaking havoc on Gotham, Bruce is facing ego death, physically healing and learning about Bane's history since she too lived in this prison when she was a child. I know, this is a mess, but it's okay because this badass scene. I'm gonna quote famed critic Roger Ebert, who said, "Bane, played by Tom Hardy, in a performance evoking a homicidal pro wrestler." And if you don't see the appeal there, I'm just not sure this is the movie for you. I'm gonna quote Roger Ebert again, but this time I'm going to disagree with him. He said that this movie isn't very much fun and it doesn't have very much Batman. While it's true that there isn't much Batman here, what he's saying by no fun is that the spectacular, often darkly humorous action sequences of Dark Knight are replaced with urban terrorism and class warfare. And sure, it's not as satisfying as the Joker, but it's a relevant story, considering the state of our country, and it's more relevant today than it was in 2012. The political theme is a consistent one throughout Rises, and while in 2012 I didn't support Bane's movement in the slightest, today, I think the choice is not as direct. Not that I support a city being blown up by an atomic bomb, but the rage against the machine, the tearing down of idolized rich political monsters, is a necessary movement. In the film, it secretly conceals Ra's al Ghul's true mission to blow up Gotham. And considering how the reputation of the peaceful Black Lives Matter protest were tarnished by right-wing agitators, it again mimics our current state of affairs. I know, I said this wasn't going to be an analysis, and while Rises is the worst of the trilogy, it has the most to talk about, and it's still a good movie. I mean, that haircut though. The Dark Knight Trilogy is from start to finish an entertaining, emotional, symbolic thrill ride that takes a childhood figure which so many people love and places him in our world. It's a daring feat that is executed magnificently. It's visually astonishing, audibly boasting Hans Zimmer's thunderous score, and it features numerous remarkable performances. The Dark Knight continues to be one of the best crime drama films ever made, and Heath Ledger's performance will always be legendary. But perhaps, most importantly, Batman made Christopher Nolan the sensation that he is. giving him credibility and resources to create more original work. The 2 films he's released since are daring, big-budget films that both impacted me greatly, and I cannot wait for Tenet. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Check out my Patreon where members vote on video topics each month, and you can also receive movies in the mail if you join my movie club. Make sure to subscribe, like the video if you did, and I'd love it if you could share. See you next time.